welcome everyone to our Back to Campus Best Practices session here today. Thank you for joining us today. Appreciate your time. And the goal of today's session really is to prepare you for when students come back to campus here in the fall to make sure that you're running really recommended releases and if there's any upgrade gotchas, things along those lines. So we've run these sessions before historically in the past, and we've done them internally, and really they've been really well received. So we wanted to extend these to customers, and this is the first year to do that. We did a session roughly a month ago. This session is going to be very similar to that, but there may be a couple small updates or tweaks from that last session. But thank you for joining us again today. And I should have introduced myself first. My name is Dan Klamert. I lead the Wireless Center of Excellence here at Cisco, and I'm also joined today by some special guests here. We have Clark Gambrel from the ISE Escalation team. Welcome, Clark. Thanks for joining us. We have Surendra, and we have Rachitha from the Wireless Escalation team. Welcome. How are you?
Thanks, Dan. Doing good. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. So if you have any questions today during the session, please submit them via the WebEx Q&A panel. You'll see that on the right-hand side in your window. You can submit those. We have a couple people on here as well to answer those questions. Al Dumdai is out here from my team as well. Ian Prosick. So we have a few others as well that are available, obviously when they're not presenting to answer questions too. So with that, in the interest of time, I believe that's all I had for the kickoff. One last reminder, if there's something in this you want to, we will send an email with the presentation afterwards. So that's a common question we get. Will this be available? Yes, we will send the email after this to everyone that attended. So you will receive a copy of this. And then also, if you did want to go back and check this out again, maybe you missed something or you wanted to rewatch a certain part, we will post this to our YouTube channel. The YouTube link to our channel is youtube.com/@getunplugged. We have a lot of other great content out there as well from wireless, from our wireless team. So I'd encourage you to subscribe to that channel for updates when we do go live with that other content and share that other content moving forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Surendra. Thanks.
Dan, thank you so much for the partnership and the introduction. Hello, team. So today we have myself, Surendra. I lead the global wireless engineering escalation team, and we work on some of the hot escalations that we get from the customers, and we provide recommendations on some of the best practices and things like that. And we have Rachitha, who's one of my engineers who works on some of these escalations. And we have Clark from the ICE business unit escalation team as well. So all three of us work very closely on some of the back to school, back to campus escalations that we get. And the purpose of this session is to make sure that we provide all the best practices to you guys well in advance, so that if you are deploying anything in next couple of months, you have all the right information to deploy and not to hit any of the issues that we have, or at least known issues. Okay. So with that, it's a power-packed agenda. So we have release recommendations from the wireless. I'll cover that. And then I'll hand it over to ICE best practices, which Clark will cover. Post that, we'll talk about the preparation for the upgrade of the controllers and some of the Wi-Fi 6E recommendations. I know many of the customers are receiving Wi-Fi 6E access points. We want to make sure that you guys have the right recommendations for that. And finally, we touch some of the WLC best practices on the control plane and the data plane, followed by some of the cool tools what we have to troubleshoot the problem faster, right? Some of the automation, what are the tools that we have? If you have collected the logs, what do you do? So those are the things that we give some of the insights as well, and the support and the escalation process by Dan. So with that, a quick update on the release recommendations, right? So we've heard about, oh, I'm running 17.3, I'm running 17.6, I'm running 17.9, and I do have iOS access points in my network. And it's a pain for me to handle two different controller releases, which is 17.3 for iOS and 17.9 for some of the Wi-Fi 6E access points. So we heard the problem and we heard the issue that you guys are facing, and we have an answer now. So it's just one single release for any deployment, right? So let it be healthcare, let it be EDU, let it be enterprise, let it be manufacturing, let it be any IoT deployment. We just have one single release for you, which we are recommending right now, which is super hardened with most of the bug fixes already in and can be loaded in any deployment. So what we are recommending right now is 17.9.3, which is as of today. And in a couple of months or in a month's time, we will be releasing 17.9.4 for the general availability. So this is one of the hardened release what we have today for any customer deployment, any vertical. And we would recommend you to upgrade to this release. And this has all the fixes that we faced last year, last year, and all the learnings that we've incorporated as well. So if just in case, if go back to the previous slide. So if in case if we hit any problems on the 17.9.3, we do have the smooths and the APSPs that we can build. So it's no longer a sales pitch, rather we are building smooth and the APSP for the long-lived releases, which is 17.3, 17.6, and 17.9. So it's going to continue on 17.9 as well. So we've just updated the small table here, which talks about the complete solution. So we just don't want to tell you, oh, you know what, upgrade your controller. I know we completely understand the pain that you guys undergo when we ask or someone asks from Cisco to upgrade, right? So it's a solution. So the controller, this is the software version, the AP supported, and the IRCM, if you have any of the older generation of the controller, what is the version that you should be on, and then the Gen 2. For the DNAC, we've given the link there which talks about the DNAC compatibility matrix. And here is the prime compatible version, CMX, and the ISE. So I hope we covered most of the solution devices here. Just in case, if not, feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to answer. And we've given some of the links in that slide. If you click on recommended release, it will take you the recommended release or the TAC recommendation release versions, what we support and what we recommend. And similarly for DNAC metrics as well. So in short, 17.9.3 and 17.9.4 is what we recommend you guys to be on, and let us know if you have any questions, concerns. I'll be happy to answer you guys offline. With that, I'm going to hand it over to ICE Best Practices. Clark, all yours.
Thanks, Surendra. By the way, you guys are doing a great job in the wireless stuff and keeping stuff going. We really appreciate that. So next slide, please. I mean, I could try to pretend here. I'm just going to click to the next slide. Okay. So I'll click again. So apparently you guys know that 3.1 is the recommended release. Got the little golden star there. I've talked about this in the past. If we go forward, thanks. I like to have fun, and you can build this out. Yeah, so coming soon, 3.2 will be the recommended release. I know this is the time that you guys are planning to upgrade and doing this. You probably have this time, and then maybe in the winter break to do this. I don't have an issue. I think there's a little more to this slide. Click one more time. Okay, so go back. We're jumping ahead. Sorry. So we're currently patch 2, patch 3 should be out. Actually, I know you guys want to know that. So patch 3 is looking around the 31st of July. I can tell you about the others after I finish this part here, but I would recommend just going to 3.2 if you guys are having to upgrade at this point. I don't have any real issues with it, anything over 3.1. And at least you get to a later version of it. If you go to the next slide, this is my shameless plug here. If you do go to 3.2, then you get log analytics, which is something that I was eager to get put in there so we can get a lot more granularity into the performance happening in your system. It makes it a lot easier for TAC to troubleshoot stuff. You'll get a lot more visibility into the system. It is going to be on by default in 3.3. That was a push that I had. I'm glad that they arrived at that. As it was off by default, didn't have a lot of people using it yet. So we will probably find little nuances here, i.e. bugs, that we'll work through in the next patch release. But the good news is it doesn't affect your system at all. So it's not like you're going to be impacted if there's an issue here. But the data is good here. It keeps it for 7 days, and it can really help you, understand what's going on in your deployment. Next slide, please. Just remember, when you are upgrading your versions, you may want to look at the upgrading the BIOS and firmware on your appliances on the 3600 series. Appliances, there is a HUU to do that. You do have to upgrade the BIOS firmware separate from some of the other stuff. So just make sure you follow through those steps. Next slide. We are currently shipping the 3700 series appliance. It's supported as of 3.1 patch 6 and above, so it is supported on 3.2. We added the ability to order SSDs and SSIDs, self-encrypting drives. I couldn't think of what it's called. In addition to the standard hard drive, the SSD should or the SSID should provide some performance increase for things like M&T, PSN, boot times, those things. It does make a difference. You guys probably already know that. So if you're using virtual machines, mimic the spec of the version you're going to. For example, if you're going to 3.2, there's no 3515, so don't have any VM size as a 3515. So match the current shipping hardware is the best practice. Next slide. I only have to do this because you'd be surprised how many people still come back to me and say they're on 2.2, and I'm like, we've not supported that for years. So just a list of some of the end of life and the support information over there. Please check this out. Please make sure that you're running more up-to-date stuff. It's a complex machine, and if we're having to troubleshoot those simple things because we're not sized correctly, that makes it more difficult. Next slide. A couple things to look out for. This one is not much fun. If you went from FCS version of 3.1, we did a respin of that ISO. So if you're on the older, the original FCS, you could encounter a bug. So what that means is, if you install the patch, patch 6, and you roll back to anything that was prior to patch 5, it won't initialize. So if you are on 3.1, you're moving forward, there's a way to determine if you're on the FCS version inside of Show Tech. The output would say, I'll come back to you and tell you what it says in a minute. I've forgotten what it's called. Oh, sorry, BTP bundle is what it says. It says BTP bundle in the start of that Show Tech. You're on the newer version, not a problem. If you're not, if you don't see that in the very first few lines, then you are on the original field of that. Either way, if you're concerned, before you roll back patch 6, call TAC and let them check it out first, because the last thing you want is all your system not to be running. So it's important. Another thing to note, I did notice some others doing it, I should add it here. If you add a hot patch in these versions and you put a real patch over top of it, let's say you're on 3.1 patch 5, you put a hot patch in there, you went to 3.1 patch 6. Once you move forward with a hot patch installed, never ever uninstall that hot patch. So either uninstall the hot patch before moving forward with the real patch, or don't ever uninstall it, because what will happen is we store those files in there, the backup, and instead of rolling back that patch and putting the patch 5 or the patch 6 files back in there, it'll put whatever your original version files when you first install the hot patch. So either, one last time, either uninstall the hot patch before moving forward, or don't ever uninstall the hot patch. So next slide, please. One more. There was one in 3.1 patch 5, we introduced a fix to validate the key usage and the extended key usage in the sorry, get rid of something here. Inside of our certificate checks for EPLS. If you had an old template that didn't have correct key usage or extended key usage in there, it would have worked before. If you would have, if you upgrade and move forward and it's still working fine after 3.1 patch 5, you have nothing to worry about. But before you go from before 3.1 patch 5 and you upgrade, at least test your certificates, because some people would have different templates when they issue certificates, and if they're not correct, then your clients won't be able to authenticate. I think that's my last slide, if you'll check. Yep, that's it. Thank you very much. Oh,
While we're transitioning here, I just want to encourage anyone to take a moment. If you have questions or throughout, you can put those in the Q&A panel here. So submit those questions in the Q&A panel on WebEx. We do have people standing by. We've already a couple questions that have been answered.
Hey Dan, thanks, do you mind if I just quickly, just real quick for those interested, 3.0 patch 8, it'll be the last patch looking around 8th of August. 2.7 patch 10, we're going to put another one out in September just for some security fixes, but that's it for it as well. 3.1 patch 8, we're looking around October. And then I think I mentioned 3.2 patch 3 at the end of July. So thanks again.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Clark, for that informative session on ISE. Now moving on to wireless. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about prior to upgrading your controllers to say 17.9.3 or 17.9.4, what you need to keep in mind based on what we have learned. And also we're going to talk about some of the best practices on the controller as well as Wi-Fi 6E recommendations. So one thing to keep in mind before upgrade is your ROM-on upgrade on the controller. So you have to upgrade your ROM-on to the latest version. The links are available in the presentation, as well as there is a upgrade guide to help you through the process of the upgrade. This is especially for people who got 9800s way before. So you need to have your ROM-on upgrade to the latest version. The reason for this is because you want to support booting larger images on your controller, as well as these ROM-on upgrades come with some very critical fixes that you will need to have on your controller. All the resolved caveats are also documented in the link provided. So one important thing to note is that there is no need to break hedging to upgrade to ROM-on. This is also the process to upgrade with HA is also documented in the upgrade guide. So do go through that. Next, we have the upgrade paths, right? So if customers are on 17.3, 17.4 or earlier, there is a specific upgrade path that you have to follow to upgrade to 17.9. Especially if you have, if your deployment has 9130s, unless you do the intermediate upgrades, the upgrade will fail. So that is something important to note and keep in mind. The matrix is there to help you understand which versions you need to upgrade to intermediately to finally upgrade to 17.9. Another thing is some customers do ISSU upgrades. There are some caveats to this. Some of the CLIs have been deprecated. So all of this has been documented in the release notes. So in order to make sure that you don't have those CLIs when you upgrade to 17.9.3, do go through the release notes documentation, which will help you understand what CLIs are necessary to upgrade.
Yeah, so the important point here is if you have the 9130s, the upgrade fails means that the APs might not be able to download the image, not the controller upgrade failing. If you have rest of the APs in your network, it will upgrade, but 9130s may fail. So the best is to go for an intermediate release, and that will help you to not to hit the problem and get the upgrades done without any problem.
So next we have there is one issue that we discovered in our lab with the temp folder being full on the AP. So basically when the AP tries to download the image and your temp folder is full, it will start getting stuck in a download loop and it will not download the image. So your pre-downloads and your image upgrade itself will fail. So one workaround that we've seen that works is going to the switch and individually flapping the APs, which will help recover it. Otherwise, another way to do this is to use CLI from the controller, which is AP image reset, before upgrading, which will reboot your APs, and then you can upgrade it with the correct image, and the temp folder will be cleared out, essentially. So we have a bug documented for this, and this bug is fixed in 17.9.3. So any future upgrades 17.9.3 and above, you will not need to perform this task. Next, we have AP image corruption. So this is typically for deployments across a WAN link. So if you have a few APs over a WAN link, the problem is when when the image gets downloaded, the image gets corrupted, and the AP detects this corruption and reports the verification failure, but it continues to be in a boot loop because of the corrupted image. So there is a workaround to this, and it is all documented in the article. Another thing to keep in mind is to keep the MTU between the AP and controller to 1500. Anything a little, maybe even if it's 1000 or 1400, it may get impacted. This issue may present itself. So that's something to keep in mind. This typically over LAN networks, this is not impacted. So most of the deployments should be okay, but yeah, WAN networks, you need to be a little careful. Again, there is a bug for this issue, which is fixed in 17.9.3. So any future upgrades, you will not have to follow this process. Next, we have the 6E recommendations. This is something that we have again learned in our labs, and something that's with some learnings from customers as well. Of course, there will be more learnings in future, and we will update that, but this is what we recommend right now. So the first thing to consider is obviously the double line design considerations, right? So you have three options here. The first option is the all-in option, where you can reconfigure all your existing WLANs to include WPA3, because that is mandated for 6 gigahertz. But this may also not allow all of your clients to work properly because not all of them support 6 gigahertz. So this is something that is most unlikely that you will be configuring. We'll go to the second option. The second option is one SSID, which is basically configuring multiple WLANs with the same SSID name, but different security settings. So this is the more conservative approach, where you can adopt 6 gigahertz clients as well as have your existing clients work pretty flawlessly. And then another option we have is to configure multiple SSIDs. This would be, you would require to redesign your SSIDs to accommodate different security settings. But at the same time, it will require reconfiguration of the clients as well, because you may change the SSID name and depending on your environment. So yeah, with that, we are in 17.9 at least, what we're recommending is a single SSID with different multiple policy profiles, different security profiles, with basically where your client can see one SSID, but it will have different security profiles. The only downside to this is roaming. I mean, if you have 6 gigahertz client, roaming from 2.4 or 5 gigahertz to 6 gigahertz or 6 gigahertz back to 2.4 and 5 is not supported. So that's the only downside to this, but otherwise, yeah, you should be able to configure with different policy profiles. However, we are supporting this in 1712. So 1712, we support a single SSID to support multiple securities with legacy and WPA3, and roaming is supported as well. However, we are not recommending this currently for back to school. It will be recommended next year.
So 1712 is actually in the EFT phase. So if the second EFT drop is done, but if you guys have any questions, or if you guys want to try out 1712 EFT, just let us know. We'll publish the image, but yeah, we can test all these things in the lab.
Yeah. So next, talking about the RF profiles and clients. So RF profile is basically where you will be configuring your channel bandwidth and your channels. What we recommend is for the 6 gigahertz profile, you keep it at 80 megahertz. This is for the US. And for customers in Europe, since your channels are lesser, you keep it at 40 megahertz. We've also, from a controller RRM perspective, we've introduced the PSC bias, which is preferred scan channel. So the clients prefer to scan the list of channels, those are mentioned there. And we do recommend that you enable the PSC enforcement so that that's what we recommend. And then from the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz perspective, there is no change in the RF profiles that we are recommending right now. In terms of clients, so Cisco has a very good partnership with different vendors, which is Apple, Samsung, Zebra, and all of those, and they recommend keeping the drivers to the latest versions. This is so that all the bug fixes are included, and they also recommend, they're also continuously improving algorithms to suit the correct channels. And at the same time, what we have noticed in our labs is with Dell and Lenovo laptops, we recommend upgrading the BIOS as well, because although they have 6 gigahertz radio, it does not scan on 6 gigahertz unless you upgrade the BIOS. So that's something to keep in mind with those laptops. All right, next. We'll talk about some of the WLC best practices that we have. So this is a slight refresher. So this is talking about the WNCDs, and of course all of you know what WNCDs are. So this is talking about the AP distribution across WNCDs based on site tags. So if you prefer, well, it's not recommended, but going the default site tag route, the APs get distributed across all the WNCD processes. This is something we don't recommend. We typically recommend you to have custom or named site tags so that all of the site tags with the same name, custom site tag, APs are assigned to those site tags and they all have the same WNCD. The way we recommend you to do this is based on your load, the client load, based on the client density and how the roaming activity involved. So based on that, you can configure your site tags. So earlier, at least, there was recommendations on the number of site tags based on the platforms, and there was a lot of mental math required to calculate how many APs per site tag and everything. So in order to overcome this issue, we have come up with an enhancement in 1793. This is so the enhanced site tag based load balancing. So with this, you are able to configure the load on the controller itself, and the controller will be able to determine how many APs will be put across the different site tags. So the controller gives preferential adjusting, so to speak, on the different site tags. So that's something we've come up with. Another enhancement is interim accounting. The interim accounting can be disabled going 17.9.3 onwards. So elaborating a little more on this. So the enhanced site tag based load balancing allows you to configure the site load, allowing the system to take better load balancing decisions. So you can go into the site tag and configure a load factor, which allows the controller to do this. So how do you choose the load? Basically, if you have sites with some normal client density or normal roaming load in areas such as offices, cubicles, where there's not a lot of roaming activity, a good way to determine this would be just the AP count. That's a good approximate of the load in such cases. That is like for a normal load. And say we have, the second is with client high density, right? And a high roaming load. So if in areas where there's a lot of roaming activity, people moving around a lot, like stadiums, cafeterias, any sort of conference floors, across classrooms. So in those cases, you will have to factor in for a higher load factor, where you can configure it to say 300 or 400. So that's something that you can explore based on your environment. Next, we have the interim accounting. So in earlier releases, with a lot of interim messages being sent to the Radius server, it caused an ISE meltdown due to for authentication, and it wouldn't authenticate any more clients. And this was if you had interim accounting enabled, right? So by default right now, interim accounting is still enabled. We're giving you a knob to disable it now. By default, it's enabled, but you can go ahead and disable it either using CLI or GUI. The only caveat is if radius profiling is enabled, this interim accounting will not work. So that's something you can look into.
The one thing to focus here is a couple of important points, right? So the behavior of 9800 and the older versions of the controller, which is AeroS controllers, 8540, 5520, the behavior was made the same starting 17.3, wherein the client connects one copy of interim accounting was going to the ISE server, and subsequent client change in the IP address or connect, disconnect, or reconnect or session timeout, those entries were going to ISE. And now the enhancement what we've done is, if you do not want those things or these accounting messages to go to ISE and overwhelm ISE, we've come up with a knob which will literally disable it, and not even a single copy will go to the ISE, and which will help you to understand to not to hit the problem. So that's what the enhancement does here.
Hey, Surendra, just to add to that, I mean, I don't know if you're coming to this, but so if you guys are using radius profiling, you disable interim accounting, you won't get that through there anymore, and so it could affect some things in context visibility or in your profiling. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, the next important thing is expired certs on iOS APs. So a lot of customers have had iOS APs for a very long time, and the certs and they complain that they didn't do anything, and suddenly the iOS APs would not join. So this, most likely the reason would be that the certificate has expired, because certificates are valid only for 10 years. So we have documented the mitigation steps in the link. So if you do have iOS APs which are nearing expiry, you can go ahead and take a look at the commands available to basically bypass that. There's a way to bypass that, so you can enable those things on your APs.
And as part of Fix, what we've done is we've increased this certificate validation from 10 years to 99 years. And that by doing that on the software fix, we will never ever hit this problem again. So this is one of the corrective actions that we've taken in the engineering to make sure that this issue will never reoccur.
So this is a huge tag case generator for us, so that's why we wanted to highlight it. Next, we have best practices on session and idle timeout. So we have seen a lot of customers who have very low session timeout values, like 30 minutes, 1 hour. And this is just not recommended. We definitely recommend having a session timeout of 8 to 24 hours, as well as idle timeout to the default is 300 seconds, and we recommend that you keep it at that and not change that. Another thing we have seen customers complain about is the web user interface slowness. So this is typically caused because the WebUI uses VTY for processing HTTP requests. So there are times when there will be multiple users connecting to the GUI or multiple SSID sessions open to the controller. And since the default number configured on the box is 15, and it may just get exhausted very easily, and that time you will see this user interface slowness. So what we do strongly recommend is that you extend this number, increase it to 50, so that you don't see the network slowness. As well as another best practice that we do recommend is to keep the TCP keep alives in and out, so that it keeps checking the connection to the box. Next we have 802.11 data rates. So a lot of customers we've seen use 6 Mbps or like the lowest data rates as supported and 12 Mbps as mandatory. So this sort of combination is generally not recommended. We do recommend having the first data rate like 12 Mbps as mandatory. This is so that the clients can see the data rates, as well as if they go to the edge of the cell, they can still maintain connectivity. So that is something we recommend on 2.4. On 5 gigahertz as well, we recommend keeping 12 Mbps as mandatory and the rest of the data rates as supported. This has also been discussed with various vendors, Apple and Zebra and Samsung, and they also recommend the same. So this is something standard that we recommend in your environments as well. Next we have the radius server timeouts and probes. So a lot of customer environments have huge deployments with controllers and radius servers, and there is a lot of focus on load balancing and redundancy and everything. And there are also several radius servers. But a lot of them complain that when one radius server goes down, you have basically a network meltdown. So this is most likely due to the radius server dead criteria and dead time not being configured correctly. So we strongly recommend that you configure these, and this is so that even if when a server is marked as dead, it will always move to a backup server, so that you don't have that network meltdown that we were talking about. Another important thing is the automate tester. So this automate tester keeps sending probes to the radius server to check if it's alive. And this is so that you have a proactive way to check it, as opposed to when all the client traffic is sent to the server and maybe it's still dead and you don't know, and the client traffic is actually being redirected to a dead server. So in order to circumvent all of that, it is better to have an automate tester probe on so that it keeps checking if the Radius server is alive. And
I have a question quick here that wasn't necessarily asked yet, but it may come up on the last slide as far as the minimum data rates. Sorry, the one I think before that then. So I know you say for most deployments. I mean, I guess the question might be, what about for high density deployments, or is there any kind of caveat we want to add there for high density auditoriums, like those where there's lots of students, those types of deployments?
Yeah, so this more or less holds good for the high density as well, because we are disabling some of the lower data rates so that we don't end up choking the bandwidth. But yeah, so this should hold good. I mean, if it is there, I mean, we might even go enable mandatory for even 12 Mbps maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, all right. This is the DCA leader and RF group names. So I think earlier the issue was that with earlier controllers 5508, 4400s, the number of APs it could scale was way lesser than 9840 and 9880. So right now we recommend that each controller is its own RRM leader. This is so that if if any other controller is chosen as RRM leader and it goes down, then the whole RRM process will have to be started again. So we do recommend that every controller be its own RRM leader. Another thing is to maintain the RF group names as the same across all campuses. This is so that controllers are or APs are not detected as rogue. So that is something we also recommend. And yeah, that's about all the best practice on the data plane, right?
Okay. Thank you so much, Rachitha, for covering that. And our team, just to before I start the WLC best practices on the control plane, all the learnings what we shared till now is not to scare you guys with providing all the known issues. Rather, the purpose of this is to make sure that you're better prepared for deploying the network for the back to campus or back to EDU, right? Sorry for that. Yeah, so all these things are known issues and they are fixed in the software release. So the purpose is to make sure that you guys don't run the software which is not having the fix, rather to make sure that you guys are on the release which fixes the problem. Right? That's the main purpose of this knowledge sharing. Okay. With that, I will start the control plane. So one of the common issues that we've seen in some of the deployments is the probe response optimization. So one of the points that goes back to what specifically Dan asked about. So in some of the high density deployments like stadium deployment or some sort of concert and things like that, right? So we've seen the processes on the CPU or the high WNCD is seen or observed. And what was found was the way we learn the probes and way the aggregation of probe happens on the controller. So if we have the default settings of 500 milliseconds, the probes seen by the WLC is huge. So that will have an impact. So what it really means is the controller has a specific task to take care. Like it has to onboard the clients, take care of the APs, and those are the priority tasks. And out of that, if WLC gets overwhelmed handling some of the probes, then the priority tasks may get toppled. So the controller may start processing some of the probes and stop processing some of the client onboarding and AP keep alives and things like that. So which might result in some of the outages or the performance issues seen. And similarly, it holds good for some of the load balancing, band select, location, 11K features, all those things. So these will have a large impact on the controller. So the best and the best thing that we can think of, or the best thing to reserve the resources on the controller to not to hit high CPU, is to limit or configure some of the probe rate limiting. So the best number that we can think of is, or based on our experience working with numerous customers with high density and some of the concerts, is to configure this wireless probe rate limit or limit 50 and 64,000. So what it really does is it would set it to 50 aggregated probe responses every 64 seconds. And these are our recommended configurations. And if you do this, the rate limiting will happen on the controller, and it will not result in any of the outages that you can see. So if you've not set it, we would recommend you to set this one to make sure that we don't see any of the issues. And on the mDNS Apple continuity. So as you all know, mDNS is one of the chatty protocols that anyone can think of. So every school, every university, unknowingly, there are some services that gets enabled, or client starts acting as an Apple TV and whatnot, right? So with exactly last year, Apple introduced a feature called Apple continuity. So what it really means is, think about each and every MacBook that you have in your network will start acting as an Apple TV. Is just having one Apple TV in the network is a chatty is super chatty in the network. Now think about that gets multiplied into the number of MacBook Pros that you have in your network, right? So that will multiply the number of mDNS traffic in your network, and it will literally exhaust all the resources that you have on the controller. So it doesn't matter, the issue will be seen on the Air OS, 9800 controllers, everywhere, because it's the external factor which is actually affecting the resources that we have. So what we recommend is, if you, and by the way, many of the customers or many of the network do not even know whether they need the Apple continuity feature or not. And what we recommend is, Apple continuity feature on the Apple products are enabled by default, and on our controllers, it is not enabled by default to block it. So what we would recommend is to have it disabled on the controller, so that you do not even make an attempt to learn what is it and to start processing it, right? So rather it will get dropped and all your resources will be in a healthy state. Next is the mDNS-Location based, and this is a well-known feature that we have on the Air OS controllers and on the 9800 now as well. So it goes back again to the chattiness of the mDNS protocol. So when mDNS gateway is enabled and uses the default mDNS profile, this results in an extremely exponential rise in the mDNS entries being cached on the controller, right? So this large amount of query responses on the controllers, it will literally eat some of the resources that we have on the controller, and might result in some of the slowness in the network, or sometimes the ping responses are slow, sometimes client onboarding is slow, and whatnot. So the recommendation what we have is to make sure that we can have the location based mDNS feature enabled, so that it's per site tag and per location. So you don't go beyond the site tag, beyond the location, and exhaust the resources. Rather, it will be confined to that particular site tag and particular location. So this is one of the features that we have, and if you have not explored it, we request and recommend to explore this and enable this feature, so that your controller and the resources are healthy. Right? And we talked about it on the previous section, which is probe aggregation, and it's just the continuation of it. So 11K is another great feature that we have. The idea here is to not to communicate to you guys to not to enable 11K. Rather, the idea is 11K is great feature and a protocol to use in a certain set of deployments and where it makes sense, right? So, and if you talk about stadiums and the public arenas, 11K is actually not helpful. What it does is it adds a huge load on the controller, because it's the amount of data or some of the data that it has to send to the controller with respect to your neighbor list, with respect to optimizations and whatnot, right? So it's a load. So in a public arena or in a stadium, the client, if it is on the if take an example, if it's on APA, and if APB is actually the second AP is actually nearer, it will always join. I mean, it's not that okay, you have to steer the client to that, right? So it will always join. So it depends heavily on the RSSI, and it will have a load on the network. So the best practice or the recommendation what we have is to disable 11K, and it is not needed, and that is one of the things that we recommend as well. Okay. Next is the SNMP. So I know majority of the existing customers do have SNMP enabled to poll the controllers, to get some of the information from the controllers, and to kind of fetch those using SolarWinds or whatever the third-party tools or even the prime infrastructure, right? So what we recommend is to avoid polling clients or AP related MIPS every 60 to 180 seconds. Rather, you can reduce it to minutes. I mean, you can go it and do it for 15 to 30 minutes. So this will help us to not to hit the load on the controller. So if your SNMP servers are keep on pulling the information every 60 seconds, every 180 seconds, we've seen some of the cases where we've seen high CPU on the controller, which results in not handling your traffic that is needed to be handled. So we do have a config knob or a workaround which will help us to navigate this problem. So first step is to make sure that you avoid any of the pulling of clients and AP related MIPS every 1 minute or 1.5 minutes or 3 minutes, rather increase it to or reduce it to 15 to 30 minutes. One. The second is to enable SNMP sub-agent cache interval, right? So this will help us to make sure that you have the cache and you don't do polling again and again and get the fresh data. Rather, you have the cache data which can be used. So there is no need for you to just fill the database. And the next important thing is on the rogue RSSI update on the DNAC. So majority of the times what we've seen is the rogue APs are actually are deemed harmful at -75 or lower, and the WLC default, it tracks all rogues. It literally tracks all rogues, even if it is at higher than -75 and whatnot, right? So it's always good to make sure that you draw the boundary and configure as -75 so that you do not learn anything which is beyond -75 and don't exhaust those resources which you're spending on identifying the rogue which is beyond -75. So with this, it will help us to reduce some of the load on the controller and also help you to get the better results. And the next thing is to reduce excessive rogue RSSI deviation to DNAC I think the default is on 1 dBm deviation. So this is the command that can be used: wireless WPS rogue AP notify RSSI deviation 10. This will help us to make sure you have the right set of numbers. So the last slide talks about the best practices. I know we covered only small subset of what we found and what we heard, what we learned. So this best practices guide on the 9800 covers majority of the learnings what we've learned from past 2-3 years and covers majority of the sections. It just goes deep into some of the latest and the greatest learnings what we've had. So one good thing about is the technical marketing team, all the field facing team, and my team within the engineering tag team, we all sit together and we decide what are the known issues that are there in the field, and we try to navigate those problems by coming up with the recommendations and coming up with some of the best practices, and we document it on this best practices guide on a monthly basis or maximum once in 2 months, right? So I really want you, every one of you, to go through this document and make sure that you guys are aware of whatever the new changes and the best practices that we are coming up with. Okay, with that, tools and support, I'm going to hand it over to Dan to talk about or give a quick view on if things are not working for you, if there are escalations, if you've opened up a attack case, you're not getting the right support, what should you do? Okay, so Dan, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Surendra. Appreciate it. All right, so on the next slide here, you'll see the attack case escalation process. So I wanted to add this slide because I think it's a very important slide, and we get fair amount of escalations sometimes where for whatever reason, the case seems to be stuck or stalled or whatnot. And a lot of times, more oftentimes than not, when I talk to customers, sometimes they don't know that, some of the tips here as far as how they can escalate the case, their TAC case, because I guess first and foremost, and most importantly, as the customer, you decide and set the priority of your TAC case. So there are various levels of severity, and I'm not going to go through all these in depth, but Sev 1 or severity level 1 is basically a network down emergency, right? This is a critical impact to your network, and it's really, in that case, both you and us, Cisco, will commit full-time resources around the clock to resolve that situation. So there will be handoffs to, when a certain TAC, if we're on day business hours here in the US, and we continue to work on this around the clock, we will hand this off to TACs around the world, and as we continue to get to the bottom and solve that case. Now, severity 2, then it's steps down to a severely degraded um, network. So you've got some significant issues there. It's not necessarily down, but it's severely degraded, and basically we'll commit full-time resources during standard business hours to resolve that situation. And then, I also see a lot of cases at a severity level 3. So there's some impact, but most business operations remain functional. And what I will say here is that sometimes when your case is sitting at a level 3, there's other resources inside of TAC that are working more, I guess cases that are Sev 2 or Sev 1. And, sometimes prioritizing or changing the level of the severity of your case to a Sev 2 can help bring attention and focus to that case on our side. But more importantly, too, we want to make sure that you are dedicating the time and the resources on your end to get the data that we're asking for, too, to help us get to the bottom of those cases and those issues to solve them. So so then I guess a couple other things. If your case isn't progressing then towards a timely resolution, you can do some additional things other than upping the severity level of the case. You can ask to make sure that a TAC escalation or a TAC lead is engaged. So you can basically ask your TAC engineer to ask a tech lead in TAC to take a look at the case. You can also call in, ask for a duty manager, and a duty manager can track someone down to get some answers at that specific point in time as well. And then ultimately, you can always contact your SE, your Cisco SE, your Cisco AM, your Cisco account team, basically to have us help you with this facilitation process. So we have contacts inside the business unit and inside of TAC that we can help put the pressure on some of those when it is a severe case or something that's been dragging on for a certain amount of time. So I just wanted to highlight that and that escalation process. I think we have one other slide here. If you have any questions on that, you can always ask your account team. We're happy to go through that more in depth with you as well. And reach out to us if you have any cases that are stalled out or not maybe moving as fast as you'd like them to be. So there are some other great tools here, and we put some QR codes in here for you to quickly scan, whether it's the tools or some documentation stuff that we maybe didn't cover, and it augments what we did cover here on today's call. So I know we're at the top of the hour and we're at time. I just wanted to once again thank everyone for their time today. I want to thank Surendra, Rachitha, Clark, and others that were answering the questions in the background too. I know we did have a couple questions on here. We'll call them somewhat design related. We are always willing and happy to follow up on those. So we look forward to, if you have questions, reach out to your account team. If you don't know who your account team is, you can always reach out to us. We have an email address that's a kind of a catch-all. It'll go to us at you can email us at getunplugged@cisco.com. So if you just email getunplugged@cisco.com, that email will go to us. We'll reach out back to you too. But always reach out to your account team if you have questions you'd like to follow up with us for further in-depth design type related conversations or things along those lines. So thank you, everyone, and we appreciate your time and look forward to a smooth transition here to back to school in the fall. Enjoy your summers and let us know if you have questions. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.